Money can buy a lot of things. It can buy a glass skyscraper that touches the clouds, a private jet that shrinks the world, and a reputation that makes enemies tremble. But for Ethan Thorne, money had just bought him a prison sentence. He stood in the mahogany-lined office of his late grandfather's estate, staring at a piece of parchment that felt heavier than lead. 48 hours, Ethan, the lawyer, a man who had seen too many family wars, said with a sigh. If you aren't legally married by sunset the day after tomorrow, the Thorne empire goes to your cousin, Julian. Ethan's jaw tightened. Julian was a man who burned through fortunes like they were dry leaves. If Julian took over, thousands of employees would lose their jobs, and the legacy Ethan's grandfather built would be dismantled in months. It's a dead man's joke, Ethan growled, his voice a low rumble. My grandfather knew I don't believe in marriage. He knew I've spent my life avoiding the traps of gold diggers. He also knew you were a man of duty, the lawyer replied. He wanted you to have a reason to come home. He wanted you to have a heart, not just a ledger. Ethan walked to the window. Outside, the city was a blur of neon and ambition. He was 34, handsome in a way that felt dangerous, and he was the most powerful man in the room. And yet, he was powerless against a single clause in a will. Find someone, the lawyer suggested. Anyone. A contract marriage. Julian is already celebrating. He's already picked out his new office. Ethan felt a surge of cold fury. He wouldn't let Julian win, but who could he trust? Every woman in his social circle was either a social climber or a shark waiting for a piece of the Thorne fortune. He needed someone who didn't care about him. Someone who was so desperate that a contract was just a transaction. Arthur, Ethan said, turning to his loyal assistant, bring the car. We're going for a drive, away from the penthouses, away from the diamonds. Ooh, he didn't know it yet, but across the city, in a diner that smelled of burnt coffee and broken dreams, his fate was already being written. Chloe Vance didn't have time for fairy tales. She didn't even have time for sleep. She was 24, with hair the color of autumn leaves and eyes that had seen too much for her age. She was currently scrubbing a grease-stained counter for the 10th time that hour. Her hands were red and chapped from the cold water, and her feet throbbed in her worn-out sneakers. But she didn't complain. Chloe never complained. In her pocket was a crumpled letter from the hospital. Her younger sister Lily was fighting a battle her body couldn't win alone. The surgery Lily needed cost more than Chloe could earn in 3 lifetimes. "Chloe, table 4 wants more water," the manager yelled. He was a man with a heart like a stone. Chloe hurried over, but as she reached for the pitcher, her vision blurred. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, so she could save the extra dollars for Lily's medicine. She stumbled and a tray of glasses shattered on the floor. The manager didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't ask why she was pale. "That's it, Vance. You're too slow, and you're costing me money. Pack your things. You're done." "Please, Mr. Henderson," Chloe whispered, her pride a heavy lump in her throat. "I need this job. My sister. Not my problem. Get out." 10 minutes later, Chloe was standing on the sidewalk. In one hand, she held a plastic bag with her uniform. In the other, her final paycheck, a pittance that wouldn't even cover a week's rent. The rain started then, a cold New York deluge that soaked through her thin jacket in seconds. She sat on a bus bench, burying her face in her hands. For the first time, Chloe felt the wall of her strength beginning to crumble. She didn't hear the luxury black sedan pull up to the curb. She didn't see the tinted window roll down. Ethan Thorne watched the woman on the bench. She looked like a drowned bird, but even in her defeat, there was a stiffness in her shoulders, a refusal to completely break. "Arthur," Ethan said. "That one." Ethan stepped out of the car, his expensive leather shoes splashing in the puddles. He held a large umbrella, shielding himself from the world. He stood over her. You look like you're having a very bad day." His voice was deep, smooth, and lacked any real warmth. Chloe looked up. She saw the suit, the watch, the eyes that looked like they belonged to a predator. She didn't look at him with hope. She looked at him with suspicion. "If you're here to offer me a ride for a price, keep moving," she said, her voice raspy but sharp. Ethan felt a flicker of interest. Most women would have been swooning or begging. This one was baring her teeth. "I'm here to offer you a job," Ethan said. "A very specific job. It pays $1 million. Chloe froze. She let out a hollow laugh. "I don't do that kind of work, mister." "Neither do I," Ethan replied. "I need a wife for exactly 1 year. No feelings, no intimacy. Just a signature and a performance. In exchange, I pay for your life, and whoever you're crying about." Chloe stood up, wiping the rain from her face. She looked him in the eye, standing as tall as her 5'4" frame allowed. $1 million? And what happens to the girl when the year is over? She goes back to her life, but with enough money to never scrub a floor again. Do we have a deal, Miss Chloe? My name is Chloe Vance, and I have conditions. The inside of Ethan Thorne's penthouse was a monument to glass and silence. Chloe stood in the center of the living room, feeling the drip of her wet hair onto the white silk rug. She felt like an alien in a world made of light. Ethan sat at his desk, a legal document already being drafted by a digital assistant. "Condition 1, Chloe said, her voice steady even though she was shivering. "The money for my sister's surgery is paid tonight, up front, before I sign anything." Ethan didn't blink. "Done. Arthur is already contacting the hospital. Your sister will have the best surgeons in the country by morning." Chloe felt a weight lift from her heart, so heavy it almost made her dizzy. Condition 2. She walked closer to him, her eyes fierce. "This is a business arrangement, nothing more. I will be your wife for your family and your lawyers. I will play the part. But," she paused, emphasizing every word, "you never touch me, no intimacy, no husbandly duties. We live in separate wings. We are strangers sharing a contract." Ethan leaned back, a small, mocking smile playing on his lips. "You think I brought you here because I was overcome with desire, Chloe?" He stood up, walking around the desk. He was a foot taller than her, a wall of power and expensive cologne. "I need a shield, not a lover. I need a woman who can stand by my side and convince the world I've changed. Your no-touching rule is perfectly fine with me. I have no interest in complicating my life with feelings." "Good," Chloe said, grabbing the pen. "Then we are in agreement." She signed the paper with a hand that didn't shake. She wasn't signing for her, she was signing for Lily. "We marry tomorrow morning at the courthouse," Ethan said. "Simple, fast. Then the real work begins. My family is having a gala tomorrow night to celebrate Julian's victory. We're going to crash that party." "I don't have a dress," Chloe said, looking at her reflection in the glass window. She looked like a ghost. "You will have everything," Ethan replied. "But remember, Chloe, my family is made of vipers. They will try to tear you apart to find the lie. If you break, we both lose everything." Chloe looked at the gold-plated pen in her hand. "I've survived on the streets of this city with $5 in my pocket, Mr. Thorne. Your family doesn't scare me." Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, he saw something more than just a tool. He saw a warrior. The morning of the wedding was not filled with flowers or soft music. It was filled with the scratch of pens on legal documents and the sterile light of a private judge's chambers. Chloe stood in a simple cream-colored dress, her hand resting on the Bible. When she said, "I do," she wasn't looking at Ethan's eyes. She was looking at the digital confirmation on her phone that Lily's surgery had begun. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Thorne," the judge said, though his voice held no warmth. He knew a business arrangement when he saw one. Ethan didn't kiss the bride. He didn't even hold her hand. He simply checked his watch. The stylists are waiting at the penthouse. You have 6 hours to become a thorn. Back at the skyscraper, Chloe was subjected to a different kind of war. A team of experts descended upon her like a whirlwind. They scrubbed the grease of the diner from her skin with salts from the Dead Sea. They treated her chapped hands with oils that cost more than her monthly rent. "Your skin is dehydrated, darling," the lead stylist tisked. "And these nails, they've seen better days." Chloe sat through it all in silence. She didn't feel like a princess. She felt like a statue being polished for an exhibition. She thought of Lily, currently under the anesthesia, and that thought kept her spine straight. Then came the dress. It was a midnight blue silk gown, draped so perfectly it looked like liquid moonlight. When Chloe finally looked in the mirror, she gasped. The tired, hollow-eyed waitress was gone. In her place was a woman of mystery and elegance. The dress clung to her curves, and a diamond necklace, a Thorne family heirloom, sat heavy and cold against her collarbone. "You look acceptable." Ethan's voice came from the doorway. He was wearing a tuxedo that made him look like a king from a dark fairy tale. He walked toward her, and for the first time, Chloe saw a flicker of something unsettled in his eyes. "Remember the rules, Chloe," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "You are the love of my life. You are the woman who tamed the wolf. If you stumble, my cousin Julian will smell the blood." "I won't stumble," Chloe said, meeting his gaze in the mirror. "Just make sure you remember the other rule. No touching, no matter what they say." "I gave my word," Ethan replied, offering his arm, but leaving a deliberate inch of space between them. "Shall we go to the den of vipers?" The Thorne estate was a fortress of old money. Crystal chandeliers threw sharp, diamond-like light across a ballroom filled with the city's elite. As Ethan and Chloe entered, the music didn't stop, but the atmosphere changed. The silence rippled through the room as guests turned to stare at the woman on the arm of the man who swore he would never marry. "Look at him," Ethan whispered, his lips barely moving. "Table 1. That's Julian." Julian Thorne was leaning against the bar, a champagne glass in his hand and a smug, predatory smile on his face. Next to him sat Beatrice, Ethan's aunt, a woman whose pearls were less sharp than her tongue. They walked toward the head table. Every step Chloe took felt like walking on glass, but she kept her head high. "Ethan!" Beatrice cried, her voice like fake silk. "And this must be the mystery bride. We were so shocked to hear of your sudden romance." "Aunt Beatrice," Ethan said coolly, "meet Chloe. The only woman who made me realize that life is more than just business." Julian stood up, scanning Chloe with a look that made her skin crawl. "A lovely story, Ethan. Truly. But I find it curious. You've been madly in love for months, yet nobody has seen her. Not at the opera, not at the gallery openings. We preferred our privacy," Chloe intervened, her voice steady and sweet. "When you find something precious, you don't always want to show it to the world immediately." The dinner began, a grueling exercise in etiquette. Beatrice and Julian pelted Chloe with questions about her family, her education, her summer home in the Hamptons. Chloe navigated the minefield with grace, using the cover stories Ethan had helped her memorize. But Julian was relentless. He was a shark that had caught the scent of blood. "You know," Beatrice said, swirling her wine, "you look so familiar, Chloe. I have an eye for faces. I could swear I saw you just last week." Chloe felt her heart skip a beat. "I travel quite a bit, Aunt Beatrice. Perhaps in the city." "No," Beatrice smiled, and it was the smile of an executioner. "It was a diner, a greasy little hole in the wall near the docks. You were wearing a very different uniform then, one with a name tag." The table went dead silent. Julian leaned in, his eyes gleaming. "A waitress, Ethan? Really? You married a girl who serves coffee for $5 an hour to save your inheritance?" Beatrice pulled a photo from her clutch, a grainy image taken through a window. It was Chloe 2 weeks ago, scrubbing the floor of the diner, her face covered in sweat and her hair a mess. The guests at the nearby tables began to whisper. The sound was like a swarm of insects. "I suppose the Thorn diamonds look a bit out of place on someone used to handling nickels and dimes," Julian sneered. "Tell us, Chloe, how much did Ethan pay for that I do? Was it $1 million? 2? Chloe felt the heat rising in her chest. Not the heat of shame, but the heat of pure, unadulterated pride. Chloe stood up. The midnight blue silk rustled, the only sound in the silent ballroom. "You're right," she said, her voice projecting to the back of the room. "I was a waitress. I worked 12-hour shifts. I scrubbed floors until my knees bled, and I did it to keep my sister alive." She looked Julian directly in the eye. "You call it a lack of class? I call it a lack of options. I've worked harder in a single morning than any of you have in your entire lives. And as for the money," she looked at Ethan. "Ethan didn't buy a wife, he bought a warrior, because he knew that when his back was against the wall, he didn't need a socialite. He needed someone who knew how to fight." Julian laughed, though it sounded forced. "A touching speech. But the will is clear, Ethan. A marriage based on fraud is no marriage at all." Ethan stood up. He didn't look at Julian. He looked at Chloe. "The marriage isn't a fraud," Ethan said, "because I've decided to change the terms of the trust. I'm not inheriting the empire." The room erupted in gasps. "My grandfather wanted me to have a heart," Ethan said, breaking his own rule as he took Chloe's hand. "And I have. I'm moving the Thorn headquarters to the city center. I'm creating a foundation for medical research, starting with the hospital where Chloe's sister is recovering." He turned to Julian. "I liquidated the assets you wanted to steal. There's no empire left, just a company that actually does good." Julian knew he had lost. Back at the penthouse, the silence felt like a beginning. "I lost billions," Chloe whispered. "I gained a partner," Ethan replied. "The contract said 1 year," he said softly, "but I'd like to renegotiate. No more lies," he continued, "no more contracts, and no more no-touching rule." Chloe smiled. "I agree. Because in the end, the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's the courage to love and the strength to stay."